Subscribe to Echo Tales for deeply emotional, romantic, and mature stories that echo through your heart. Don't forget to like, share, and comment to support meaningful storytelling. It began on a quiet Thursday evening, the kind of night that feels heavy with something unspoken. Rain tapped gently against the window panes of apartment 3B, and the air inside buzzed with the warmth of shared silence, the kind only found between people who know each other too well to pretend anymore. Nina sat cross-legged on the living room floor, her hands wrapped around a chipped blue mug of mint tea. Across from her, Eli was leaning into the couch, half listening to the jazz playing in the background. Mira was stretched out beside him, flipping through an old photography book. Jay, the last of them, leaned against the kitchen counter, spinning an apple lazily in one hand, watching them all with that familiar half-smile that always seemed to say, "I know something you don't." They had been living together for nearly a year, thrown together by rent prices and timing, but kept together by something else entirely, something that had quietly grown roots beneath their feet. What started as casual friendship had twisted into stolen glances, long conversations at midnight, and a closeness that didn't have a name. Each of them had become a part of Nina's life in ways she hadn't expected. Eli, with his calm and quiet loyalty, always seemed to know what she needed before she did. Mira, fierce and brilliant, never let her hide from her fears. The kind of friend who held your hand and pushed you forward all at once. And Jay was chaos in the shape of a boy, but with a soul that made her feel like the world could be both wild and safe at the same time. That night, something had shifted in the air. Maybe it was the storm outside. Maybe it was the way Eli's eyes lingered too long when she laughed, or the way Mira's fingers brushed hers like it meant more than it should. Or maybe it was Jay, watching her like he already knew what she was about to say. Nina took a deep breath, the words pushing their way up from some place she'd kept locked for too long. "What if," she began softly, her voice barely rising above the music. "What if we stopped pretending we don't feel what we feel?" 3 pairs of eyes turned to her, startled. She hesitated but didn't back down. "What if all 3 of you joined in? No more guessing, no more secrets, just honesty about this, about us." The silence that followed wasn't cold. It was full, like the air before a downpour, heavy with unsaid things. Mira's mouth opened, then closed. Eli set his mug down too carefully. Jay stopped spinning the apple and let it roll off the counter with a thud. For a moment, Nina thought she'd broken something sacred. But then Jay spoke, voice low and unreadable. "You're serious?" She nodded, and slowly, almost like a ripple across a still lake, something changed in the room. No one laughed. No one brushed it off. Mira leaned forward, her expression unreadable but intense. "What are you really asking us for, Nina?" And Nina, eyes shimmering with fear and hope, whispered, "A chance. To see what this could be. With all of you." And just like that, the atmosphere cracked open. Not with answers, but with possibilities. They didn't say yes. They didn't say no. But in the way Eli gently reached for her hand, in the way Mira looked at her like she'd waited for this moment, and in the way Jay's smile finally softened into something real, Nina knew the question had landed. Whatever happened next, there was no going back to how things were. The door was open now. And on the other side, something powerful, maybe even beautiful, was waiting. The morning after Nina's unexpected question, the apartment felt different, like it had taken a deep breath and wasn't sure how to exhale. The sunlight, streaming through the windows, caught the dust in the air, casting golden flecks across the worn wooden floors. But no one said anything at first. Eli moved about the kitchen with quiet purpose, frying eggs and toasting bread like muscle memory kept him from overthinking. Mira sat at the kitchen table, twirling a pen between her fingers, watching Eli but lost in thought. Jay hadn't even bothered with a shirt, just leaned against the doorframe with a cup of black coffee. Eyes on Nina like she was the start of a story he wasn't sure how to finish. Nina stood at the counter, heart pounding with the weight of what she had said the night before. She hadn't planned it. It had just slipped out, like the truth often does after too many nights of wondering and wishing. But it was out now, and no one had laughed. No one had walked away. That had to mean something, didn't it? Then, Eli spoke first. Not looking at anyone, he simply said, "If we're going to do this, whatever this is, we have to talk about it. Like, really talk." His voice was steady, but his hands trembled slightly as he passed around plates. Mira nodded, tapping the table. Agreed. No pretending. No half-truths. We either go all in, or not at all. Nina's chest tightened at the seriousness in her tone. She had known it would come to this, the hard conversations. Still, she had hoped for something lighter. But Jay broke the tension with a wry grin. "We sound like we're signing a treaty. Maybe we should make it official and all sign the toaster." A few nervous laughs passed around the table, but it was enough to soften the edges of the moment. They talked for hours. Not about rules, but feelings. The kind people usually bury for fear of ruining everything. Eli admitted how long he'd been drawn to Nina, how her quiet strength grounded him in ways he couldn't explain. Mira confessed that she had never wanted to fall for a roommate, let alone two, but that something about Nina had always made her feel seen in a way she hadn't since her first heartbreak. And Jay didn't say much at first. He just watched Nina, his thumb running along the rim of his coffee mug. Then he said softly, "I'm not the guy who plans ahead. I never have been. But you, all of you, make me want to try." His voice cracked slightly on the last word. That was Jay. All charm on the surface. But underneath it, a deep well of ache and yearning he rarely showed. By the end of the day, no one had made any grand promises. They didn't define what they were or put a label on the strange, tangled thing forming between them. But there was something stronger than definition. Intention. They made a quiet agreement to move forward, to try, to explore what this connection meant, even if it didn't fit neatly into any box. No illusions, no rushing, just honesty, day by day. Nina felt a quiet bloom of hope deep in her chest. Not the wild, dizzying kind of hope that burns out fast, but the slow, steady kind that says this might actually work. Still, beneath all, the warmth and openness, she couldn't shake a tiny, persistent thought. What if love, stretched in 3 directions, starts to tear? She didn't say it out loud, not yet. But it was there, lingering like a shadow behind her smile. Even as Mira laughed, Eli reached for her hand, and Jay leaned in with that devilish spark in his eyes. For now, they were in it together. But love, Nina was beginning to realize, is never as simple as saying yes. For a while, it felt like falling into a dream, one Nina didn't want to wake up from. Apartment 3B became a world of its own, where rules were rewritten and love didn't follow a single line. The warmth between them grew naturally, like vines finding sunlight. There were no labels, no forced roles, just moments. Soft, beautiful moments that made Nina believe this strange, delicate thing they were building might actually hold. Movie nights turned into tangled blankets and quiet cuddles. Bored, games stretched past midnight with stolen glances and laughter that echoed into the walls. There were days when she'd find Eli on the balcony, eyes closed, reading poetry aloud just loud enough for her to hear. Mira started painting again, leaving streaks of color across the living room wall when inspiration struck. And Jay, reckless, radiant Jay, would strum his guitar softly in the mornings, his voice rough and sleepy, only growing louder when he noticed her listening. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. They made space for one another, both in the apartment and in each other's lives, letting emotions bloom without needing to pick one over the other. Nina had never felt so full, or so vulnerable. But love, even when freely given, comes with shadows. And slowly, those shadows began to creep in. It wasn't anyone's fault. In fact, that made it harder. The hurt wasn't sharp, just quiet and creeping, like vines growing too wild. Jealousy arrived not as an argument, but as a pause. Eli hesitating before speaking, Mira pulling away during conversations, Jay going quiet during dinner. One evening, Nina found herself alone on the couch, 3 untouched mugs of tea cooling, on the table. They had all said they were busy, with work, with errands, but she could feel the weight of something unsaid thick in the air. That night, Mira came into the kitchen and stood there in silence, arms crossed, face unreadable. Nina looked up from the sink and asked softly, "You okay?" Mira didn't answer at first. Then, in a voice so fragile it didn't sound like hers, she said, "It's hard, loving you like this, wanting all of you, but not always having it." Nina's heart clenched, because she understood. She wasn't choosing anyone, but in moments, little moments, someone always felt left behind. Later that week, Eli started spending more time out of the house, claiming deadlines and meetings, but his distance wasn't in his schedule. It was in his eyes. Jay, too, grew quieter. The sparkle in him dimmed, replaced by something Nina couldn't name. He still smiled, still cracked jokes, but the warmth behind them had shifted. He no longer reached for her hand without thinking. And then, one night, she heard the door slam. At first, she assumed it was someone stepping out for groceries or air, but Jay didn't come back. Not that night. Not the next. His room sat untouched, his jacket still hanging by the door like a question. Mira tried to act like it wasn't a big deal. Eli said nothing at all. But Nina felt it in her bones. He had left. It wasn't a breakup. How could it be, when they had never defined what they were? But it felt like one. The air in the apartment grew heavier. The silence between the remaining 3 became a 5th presence. Nina lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, wondering how something that had once felt so right could so quickly begin to unravel. She had asked for all of them. She had believed they could make it work. But now, one of them was gone. And she didn't know if love, when divided, could survive the cracks it left behind. What scared her most wasn't that Jay had left. It was the realization that without him, everything else might fall apart too. The days after Jay's disappearance passed in a slow, aching blur. At first, Nina told herself he just needed space, a breather, something temporary. But when his absence stretched beyond a few nights, the truth began to settle in like dust on untouched shelves. He wasn't coming back anytime soon. The apartment felt hollow without him. His laughter no longer echoed down the hallway. His half-drunk coffee mug stayed in the sink untouched, and his guitar sat in the corner like a forgotten memory. Nina hadn't realized how much of their shared rhythm depended on him. On the way he lit up the room without trying, the way he pulled them all together like a flame drawing in moths. Now that he was gone, things didn't just feel quieter. They felt off balance, like a song missing its harmony. Eli still cooked breakfast every morning, but he no longer hummed as he stirred the eggs. Mira still painted, but the colors she chose were muted, shadows of what they used to be. And Nina, she went through the motions, smiling when expected, laughing when she could, but her chest felt heavy all the time. Not just with grief, but with guilt. She blamed herself. Maybe she had asked for too much. Maybe trying to love 3 people wasn't brave. Maybe it was selfish. In her journal, the words spilled out like confessions. I asked all three of them to join in, but maybe I never stopped being afraid to lose them. She couldn't talk about it with Eli or Mira, not yet. Everyone was tiptoeing, afraid that saying Jay's name out loud might make the cracks grow wider. Then, one rainy afternoon, a small brown package arrived at their doorstep. No return address, no name. Just 3B scrawled across the front in familiar, messy handwriting. Nina opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a worn-out cassette tape and a single folded note. 5 words, written in Jay's unmistakable scrawl. "Play it, if you're listening." Her throat tightened. Mira and Eli stood close by, silent, as she slipped the cassette into Mira's old tape player, the kind they used during late-night music sessions. The tape crackled to life. Then his voice, low, vulnerable, a little shaky, filled the room. "Hey, it's me. I guess you figured that out. I didn't plan to leave. Not really. I just couldn't stay. I love you. All of you, but I didn't know if I could keep watching you all fall deeper into each other while wondering where I fit in. I thought I could handle it. Turns out I couldn't. So I left. Not because I stopped caring, but because I cared too much. And didn't know how to say it. But I miss you. God, I miss you. If you're still listening, if there's still space for me, come find me. I'm by the sea. Same place I told Nina about. If not, I get it. I just wanted you to know." By the end of the recording, Mira had tears in her eyes. Eli looked down, fists clenched, face unreadable. Nina, however, felt something rise in her, not just grief or longing, but clarity. Jay hadn't run because he stopped loving them. He had run because he didn't feel chosen, and maybe none of them had been brave enough to reassure him that he mattered just as much. Nina turned to Eli and Mira, her voice steady. "We have to go. We can't just let him stay gone. Not like this." And in their eyes, she saw it. Not just agreement, but hope. The kind of hope that said maybe it's not too late. Maybe some missing pieces aren't lost, just waiting to be returned. The road to the sea was long and quiet, a winding stretch of coastal highway where silence said more than words could. Nina sat in the back seat of Mira's car, watching the waves come in and out like breath. Beside her, Eli stared straight ahead, hands clenched lightly on his knees, as if holding back something too large to speak. Mira drove with her usual calm intensity, eyes on the road but mind clearly somewhere else. Likely with Jay. None of them had asked the others why they were coming. They didn't have to. Jay's voice on that cassette had done something no amount of waiting could. It reminded them that their story wasn't finished, just paused. That love, even when stretched and strained, could still call you home. The closer they got to the coast, the more Nina's heart ached, with a strange mixture of hope and fear. Would he still be there? Would he even want to see them? Or worse, would he have moved on, choosing the simplicity of solitude over the complexity of the connection they had offered? By the time they reached the beach town, the one Jay had once described to Nina during a late-night kitchen talk, with sea salt chips in their hands and stars in their eyes, the sky was turning a soft, melancholic gold. The ocean roared, in the distance, familiar and wild. They parked near a quiet stretch of sand, where small cottages lined the shore and boats swayed gently in the breeze. "He said the old lighthouse," Nina whispered, pointing toward the faded silhouette up the hill. Her voice shook, but she didn't stop walking. Neither did the others. The climb was steep, the kind that made your legs burn and your doubts rise. But when they reached the top, they saw him. Jay stood barefoot on the rocks behind the lighthouse, wind tugging at his curls, shirt unbuttoned and fluttering like a flag in surrender. He was staring out at the ocean, hands in his pockets, as if trying to gather courage from the tide. For a moment, none of them spoke. Nina wanted to run to him, but her feet wouldn't move. Mira's breath caught in her throat. Eli's jaw clenched. Then Jay turned, and everything stopped. His eyes, tired, guarded, but unmistakably filled with longing, locked onto theirs. And for a heartbeat, the space between them vanished. "You came," he said, voice cracking. "I didn't think you would." Nina stepped forward first. "Of course we came. You didn't leave because you stopped loving us. You left because you didn't think we did." Jay looked away, swallowing hard. "I didn't want to be just tolerated, or part of something where I was always in the corner." Mira stepped beside Nina, her voice gentle but firm. "You were never in the corner. You were the center. We just forgot to tell you." And then Eli, quiet for so long, finally spoke. "We hurt you, Jay. That's on us. But if you still want this, if there's still a place for us in your heart, we want to come home. With you." Jay's face crumpled, not with pain, but with relief, as if he'd been holding his breath for days, and now, at last, could exhale. He stepped forward slowly, and this time, when Nina reached out, he didn't hesitate. He folded into her arms like he had never left. Mira pressed her forehead to his, and Eli's hand found his shoulder, grounding him. No fireworks, no dramatic music, just quiet, raw, real love. The kind that doesn't always make sense, but still finds its way back. They didn't need to define what they were, not now. All that mattered was that none of them were missing anymore. The sea no longer stood between them. It had carried them back to each other. The days that followed were quieter, but not empty. After the reunion by the sea, the four of them decided not to rush back to the apartment, as if the lighthouse, the ocean air, and the salt on their skin could teach them how to begin again, not where they had left off, but somewhere softer. They rented a small beach house nearby, nothing fancy, just 2 bedrooms, creaky floors, and wide windows that opened to the sound of the waves. It was enough. Mornings became slow rituals of shared coffee and sleepy smiles. Mira painted on. Driftwood she found along the shore, her colors growing bolder with each passing day. Eli cooked. This time not just to fill plates, but to show love. Breakfasts with cinnamon and honey, dinners made with careful hands and thoughtful eyes. Jay fixed the broken door on the deck and strung fairy lights above the porch. At night, they sat beneath them, wrapped in blankets, listening to the sea and each other, letting the unspoken things finally be spoken. "And Nina," she wrote, in her journal, in the sand with her finger, on napkins and crumpled paper. Words poured out of her like the tide, messy, raw, and full of hope. They talked more now, not just about their feelings, but about how to hold each other better. Jay admitted that sometimes he needed to be told he was needed. Mira confessed that sharing space didn't always mean sharing emotions, that sometimes she put up walls without meaning to. Eli revealed his fear of being a burden, of always playing the steady one, when inside he was just as afraid of falling apart. And Nina finally said what she'd held back for too long, that in trying to love them all equally, she had forgotten that love isn't a balance sheet. It's a living, breathing thing. It needs attention, not perfection. So they made changes. Not grand gestures, just small daily choices. They checked in. They took turns planning dates, sometimes as a group, sometimes one-on-one. They didn't force symmetry. If 2 of them needed time, the others gave space without insecurity. If one struggled, the rest listened without judgment. It wasn't always smooth. There were still disagreements, flare-ups of jealousy, misunderstandings. But now, there was also forgiveness and the willingness to stay. That made all the difference. Eventually, they returned to apartment 3B. It was the same. Creaky floors, the scent of old books, sunlight catching on the chipped kitchen tiles. But it also felt new. They rearranged the furniture together, painted the walls a calming sage green, and hung up Mira's beach paintings. Jay's guitar found its home by the window again. Eli bought new plants and Nina filled a shelf with her notebooks. And one quiet evening, when the rain was tapping gently on the windows and the world outside felt far away, they sat on the floor in a tangle of limbs and soft blankets. No one spoke. They didn't need to. They were all there, present, whole, not perfect but trying. And that was enough. Nina looked around at the people she once feared losing and felt the tears prick her eyes. Not from sadness, but from the quiet, steady truth of it all. They had stayed. Through longing, through distance, through fear. They had found their way back. She reached for Jay's hand, then Mira's, then Eli's. No promises, no declarations. Just the warmth of fingers intertwined, a silent vow to keep choosing each other every messy, beautiful day. Because some love stories aren't about happy endings, they're about learning how to hold on. And this one? It was still being written, heart by heart, hand in hand, under the soft hum of lights they'd hung together. A love that had stumbled, but most of all, had learned to stay.